If there's one thing I learned early on, it's that no matter what you have inside, people will judge you by your appearance, the clothes you wear, the places you go, and above all, by the last name you carry. My name is Camilla, and if you saw me today, you wouldn't imagine for a second that I was once humiliated for not being classy enough. That they laughed at my loud laugh at a formal dinner, that they whispered about my manners as if I were some kind of rural freak among the urban elite. But this story isn't about my pain, it's about what happens when arrogant people find out they've stepped on the wrong person. Because what that rich family didn't know, and what would bring them to their knees later on, is who my parents really are. It all started when I met Eduardo. Tall, elegant, with an easy smile, he was the heir to the Santoro family, owners of a chain of private clinics throughout Brazil. He saw me getting off the bus one day, holding a lunchbox in my hand and a patched bag slung over my shoulder. Instead of laughing, he complimented me. He said I was different, and little by little, he won me over. We fell in love quickly. It was one of those romances that seems straight out of a movie. Secret meetings, notes left in the glove compartment, late nights at gas stations talking about life. Eduardo said his family was traditional, but that they would accept me in time. I wanted to believe him. The first time he introduced me to them, I spent hours choosing an outfit. I spent my entire paycheck on a rented dress and uncomfortable heels. But none of that mattered. When I entered the Santoro mansion, I was greeted with cold stares and fake smiles. His mother, Dona Vera, didn't even try to hide it. "Camilla, is that right? Simple name. And what do you do for a living?" She said this while looking at my purse as if it were a garbage bag. His father barely spoke to me. His sister, Juliana, pretended to be nice, but her questions were laced with venom. "Have you ever traveled to Europe?" "Oh no? That's too bad. It changes your life." The air in that house was as suffocating as the jewelry that sparkled on their wrists. Eduardo tried to defend me, but it was clear he was torn. And the more I tried to please them, the more they made me feel like an animal out of the zoo. I became the poor girl with no class, the girl with no pedigree. And despite everything, I continued to pursue the relationship. Because I loved Eduardo. Or at least I thought I did. But deep down, a part of me was already boiling. Because it wasn't just wounded pride, it was dignity being trampled on. And there, that night, watching the discreet laughter, the toasts that ignored me, and the looks of superiority, a seed was planted. And it would grow with every contempt that followed. They judged me without knowing where I came from. But that would change everything. The last straw came on a Saturday night. It was Dona Vera's birthday, and Eduardo asked me to go with him. I hesitated. I knew that house had never been neutral ground for me, but he insisted. He said he wanted to show his mother that I was part of his life, that she needed to respect me. Once again, I believed him. I bought a new dress, nothing extravagant, but pretty. I did my hair and put on makeup with great care. In the mirror, I repeated to myself, "You are just as valuable as anyone else there." When I arrived, I was ignored by almost everyone. I greeted the guests and received cold smiles and a few forced nods. At the cake table, I heard a group of older women whispering among themselves. "Is that her? The Camila?" "Yeah. They say she works in a store at the mall." My God. He has so many better options. Eduardo tried to lighten the mood and took me over to a group of his friends, but the awkwardness only increased. They talked about trips to Switzerland, stock market investments, skiing in Aspen. I smiled the whole time, trying to keep up, but I was soon left out. Then came dinner, a long table set with more cutlery than I knew how to use. I could barely pick up my napkin without shaking. When dessert was served, Eduardo announced something that took me completely by surprise. "I have something to tell you. Camila and I, we're engaged." For a second, the room froze. All eyes turned to me as if I had committed a crime. And then, the muffled sound of cutlery fell onto the tablecloth. Dona Vera stood up. The smile on her face was tense, forced. She walked over to me with a glass of sparkling wine in her hand. And in front of everyone, with that sweet voice that only rich mothers know how to use to humiliate someone, she said, "Darling, are you really sure you know what you're doing? Marrying Eduardo means entering a world that demands poise, education, class. It's a lot of pressure for someone like you, don't you think?" A stifled laugh ran through the guests. I froze. "Vera?" Eduardo tried to intervene, but she continued, Don't get me wrong, Camila. You seem hardworking. But you see, our family has a reputation to uphold. A bride needs to belong, not look like an extra. Extra. That word cut me. I felt my face burn. The whole room was watching me, waiting for my reaction. And then Juliana finished. Maybe you should watch The Crown, Camila. It might help you behave like a lady. They laughed. Everyone laughed. Eduardo did nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't stand up. He just sat there, staring at his plate, ashamed of me. I got up, I grabbed my bag, and I left. I didn't run. I walked slowly, with what dignity I had left, while behind me the muffled laughter continued like daggers being stabbed in my back. On the sidewalk, the night wind blew in my face, and it was there, standing in front of the Santoro mansion, looking at that pompous and empty facade, that everything inside me broke and rebuilt itself. I wouldn't cry for them. I would come back, but on my own terms, and they would never forget the day they found out who I really was. In the days that followed that night, I disappeared. I deleted my social media accounts, asked for time off work, and locked myself in the tiny apartment I rented at the back of Mrs. Need's house, a widow who hardly ever saw me leave. The humiliation still echoed inside me. I relived every word, every laugh, every look of contempt, and worst of all, Eduardo's silence. The man who said he loved me, who swore to protect me. In the end, he remained silent when it mattered most, and that silence screamed louder than any insult. My friends looked for me, but I avoided talking to them. I didn't want advice. I didn't want pity. I wanted to disappear. Over time, the rumors started. At the mall where I worked as a store manager, I heard the employees whispering, "She was engaged to Eduardo Santoro. Can you believe it? Can you imagine what she did to get dumped?" Oh, she definitely didn't fit the mold. The customers' looks changed. Once friendly, they now looked at me with that embarrassed compassion, like someone who had tried to fly too high and fallen flat on their face. I received a message from Eduardo. Just one. "Camila, I'm sorry about what happened. I love you, but my family, they were very upset. I think we should take some time apart. I need to get things sorted out. Take some time apart." He threw me into the depths of despair, and now he wanted time to get his life together. I laughed. For the first time in days, I laughed. A bitter, lonely laugh. The laugh of someone who understands that it's finally over. But also the laugh of someone who is beginning to feel something different. Anger. I went back to work, but something in me had changed. I no longer cared about pleasing others. I started saving every penny. I cut out everything. Makeup, hair salon, new clothes. I began using my free time to study something I had left behind years ago, my family history. I had scattered memories of my childhood, dinners in elegant homes, my mother in fancy clothes, my father at meetings full of important men. But it all fell apart when they died in an accident, and I was raised by a distant aunt without much affection or explanation. Now, as an adult, with an open wound in my pride, I decided to revisit that past. I looked through old albums. I rummaged through stored documents, and there, among yellowed papers and forgotten photos, something began to reveal itself. My father, Fernando Albuquerque, had been a powerful name. A man who, from what I read in clippings and records, founded an international logistics company worth millions. My mother, Livia Dorado, was the daughter of a diplomat and had studied in Paris. They left an inheritance, but I never knew about it. Everything disappeared when they died. Apparently, there was something shady going on, something involving embezzlement, manipulation, and perhaps theft. I asked for help from an acquaintance, Enrique, who worked in property law. He was shocked by what I discovered. According to him, there was a hidden will, a case filed in secret, and the name listed as the rightful heir to all of Fernando and Livia's assets was mine. My body froze. For years, I had lived as an ordinary orphan, forgotten, rejected. But the blood that ran through my veins was that of influential, respected people, and more than that, people who had been betrayed by someone who had manipulated everything. I needed to understand who and why. But before that, before justice, before the truth, there was something stronger pulsing inside me. Revenge. The first time I heard the phrase, "Silence is the most lethal weapon of revenge," I didn't pay attention. but now it made perfect sense. I knew exactly what I had to do. And more importantly, I knew I had to look like I wasn't doing anything. Henrique, the lawyer who was helping me with the paperwork, became my closest ally. We discovered that after my parents died, the aunt who raised me, Regina, my mother's sister, had forged documents, hidden my name, and sold my father's share in the company, pocketing everything. The value exceeded $12 million, in addition to properties and investments. She disappeared from my life when I turned 18. She vanished without a trace after selling the house where we lived. Now it made sense. She had taken what was mine. Henrique advised me not to rush into any legal proceedings. He had a plan, and I had another, a complementary one. While he took care of the legal issues, I started to build a new image for myself. I left the store in the mall. I got a low-profile job at a medium-sized logistics company, ironically a competitor of my father's former company. I used my free time to study business, management, and market behavior. I transformed myself inside and out. No makeup, no high heels, no rush. And for the first time in my life, no fear of looking simple. I started attending business events. I went alone, discreetly. I watched, I listened. I learned the language of the rich, the subtext. And little by little, I started making contacts. Nothing too big. Just enough to join conversations and know what was going on. And it was in one of these circles that I heard the name Santoro Participações again. Eduardo had been promoted to director, and the company was trying to merge with a logistics group that was expanding, the very group I had started working for. I smiled to myself. That's when I started preparing for the second step. With Henrique's help, I quietly began legal proceedings to recover my parents' assets, but in secret. We included clauses that prevented the heir's name from being disclosed until the proceedings were concluded. This gave me an advantage. Meanwhile, with what Henrique had already managed to unblock, I discreetly opened a holding company abroad. A small empire was being born, far from the eyes of those who despised me. I started investing heavily in smaller companies, many of them in debt but with potential. In less than a year, I was the majority shareholder in 3 companies that supplied Santoro Participações directly. And they had no idea. At the wedding of one of the businessmen I started working with, I ran into Juliana again, Eduardo's sister. She didn't recognize me right away. She was thinner, stressed out, and her tone was still arrogant. She tried to strike up a conversation, thinking I was just another nouveau riche. "Camilla? Is that you? Wow, I almost didn't recognize you. You look different. You've really changed, huh? Some wounds make us grow, Juliana. Sometimes too much to fit into the little world we used to live in." She smiled wanly. She asked what I was doing. I just said, "Business. I take care of some acquisitions. Logistics." Her eyes widened a little. I was seen again, but under a new veil. I was no longer the poor girl with no class. Now, I was an unknown. And that was exactly what I wanted. The game had begun, and every move was being calculated down to the millimeter. Because when the time came, I would not only reveal who I am, I would show them who they are without their masks. The girl rejected in the dining room was about to return. But this time, as the mistress of the table. True revenge doesn't come screaming. It whispers. And when you realize it, everything around you has already changed. My first moves were almost imperceptible. But sure. I took advantage of my involvement with Santoro Participações' suppliers to influence contract decisions. I started planting slight delays, strategic logistical problems, and occasional cost increases. Nothing alarming, yet. Just enough to cause discomfort. Santoro began to feel the effects. Eduardo, now as executive director, started showing up at emergency meetings with our suppliers. The group I work in, and which I had been quietly helping to expand, became a key player in the supply of inputs. And like a well-played game of chess, I moved the pieces, knowing that the king was approaching checkmate, without knowing it. At the third conciliation meeting, I was invited as a representative of the international holding company that had acquired one of these suppliers. The meeting was scheduled at a luxury hotel, and Eduardo was present. When I entered the room, wearing a sober dress, light makeup, and impeccable posture, time stood still. He turned pale. It took him a second to recognize who I was, and another to understand that I was there as an executive, as an authority. The shock was visible. "Camilla?" he said, standing up, incredulous. I just nodded, emotionless. "Gentlemen," I began. Let's discuss the critical supply issues before we analyze the renegotiation terms. No one in that room knew about our past. To them, I was just another foreign businesswoman with Portuguese too fluent for simultaneous translation. To Eduardo, I was the past coming back with a new skin. During the meeting, I kept my composure. I was firm, technical, strategic. He, on the other hand, was shaking. He stuttered. He lost focus. His team noticed, but didn't comment. When we left the room, he called me in the hallway. Camila, wait, we need to talk. I turned to him, unhurried. We have nothing to talk about, Eduardo. This is business. I hope you treat this relationship with the professionalism your mother always demanded of me. His face flushed. The mention of his mother was a surgical blow. And there began the second phase of my move. Gradual exposure. I used my network of contacts to discreetly publicize the new investments my holding company had made. I sponsored networking events where I appeared as a guest of honor. And of course, I organized a conference for women entrepreneurs, of which Juliana, Eduardo's sister, was a board member, and she was forced to introduce me. She tried to maintain control, but her voice trembled when she announced, "And now, the CEO of Albor Holdings, specialist in strategic acquisitions and one of the emerging leaders in the logistics sector, Camila Albuquerque." Yes, I used my real surname in public for the first time. The reaction was a shockwave. The name Albuquerque still carried weight in the right circles, and I made sure that was remembered. That same night, a journalist investigating business dynasties in Brazil came to talk to me. "You're related to Fernando Albuquerque, right? He was one of the founders of Cargo BR. Yes, I interrupted with a slight smile. He was my father. The next day, my interview appeared on a business website. The headline, "Daughter of Missing Tycoon Returns to the Market as Powerful CEO and Changes the Course of the Industry." The Santoros read it. The impact was immediate. It was as if someone had lifted the veil of ignorance from their faces. That classless girl now had a name, blood, and power. But the best was yet to come. When the name Camila Albuquerque began to circulate among business councils as one of the minds behind the reorganization of the logistics sector, it wasn't just a surprise. It was a warning. For many, she was a young executive from a modest background. For the Santoros, she was the embodiment of the mistake they had made, and which now haunted them with relentless force. Santoro Participações had been struggling to maintain contracts with reliable suppliers. The market was unstable, and delays caused by companies in which I had a stake began to cause problems with hospital deliveries, one of the family's main sources of income. In less than 4 months, 2 hospitals suspended agreements due to logistical failures. Confidence in the Santoro name began to crumble. The company's image was shaken, and rumors of mismanagement circulated among investors. What no one knew was that all of this had been meticulously planned. Eduardo tried to take action. He called emergency meetings, reshuffled teams, and tried to force agreements. But every attempt encountered a new barrier. Because, behind the scenes, I had eyes and ears in almost every department that mattered. Meanwhile, the courts finally recognized my parents' will, releasing the rest of the inheritance, which, ironically, included a minority stake in my father's former company, a stake that was now, through mergers and acquisitions, directly connected to the Santoro network. In other words, I became a partner of those who tried to destroy me. The irony was delicious. I started showing up at events where I had never been invited before. Charity fashion shows, innovation conferences, lunches with CEOs, and at a dinner organized by an international bank in São Paulo, I sat at the same table as Dona Vera. She almost choked on her wine when she saw me, but like any lady of the decadent elite, she forced a smile. "Camila, dear, it's been so long. You look stunning." "Thank you, Vera. The years are kind to us, aren't they? Or, at least to some people." She didn't answer. The silence between us was more eloquent than any words, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew I was coming back, and worse, now I had something she couldn't buy with her jewelry. Respect. A few days later, I received an anonymous message, but I recognized the number. Juliana. "Camila, can we talk? I need to apologize. I didn't know your story. I swear. Can we meet? I beg you." I ignored it. Later, I saw in a financial gossip column that Juliana was being investigated for internal fraud in one of the company's projects. She was desperate to clear her name. I didn't lift a finger. I let the truth, always delayed, come to her door. And Eduardo. He came looking for me again. He sent flowers to my office. He wrote a long handwritten letter. Camila, you've always been different. I never stopped loving you. I was wrong. My family was wrong. I know that now. I just wanted a chance to look you in the eyes and say, I'm sorry. I laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. That man had his chance. He had several, in fact. He lost me the moment he remained silent when I needed him most. There was no forgiveness that could erase the silence of those who remained silent. The following week, I called a press conference to announce the new merger between the logistics group I had invested in and one of the most respected international holding companies in Europe. On the same stage, with the microphones on, I said, "It is an honor to announce that the new logistics structure will be led by me as CEO of Alber Global. We are building a system where merit speaks louder than last names, and where those who have been underestimated have a place in the spotlight." The phrase resonated. The next day, the major newspapers quoted my speech as a direct message to the traditional Brazilian elite, and I knew that every word echoed like a punch in the soul of the Santoros. But it wasn't over yet. The climax was still to come, the final blow, and for that, I had something very special in store. The invitation arrived as an irony of fate. The annual Brazilian Private Health Gala, a luxurious event held at the Copacabana Palace, where the big names in medicine, business leaders in the sector, and important political figures gathered to celebrate the achievements of the sector. The Santoro family would not only be present, they would be honored that night for their supposed contribution to access to healthcare in Brazil. When I received the call from the organizer inviting me as one of the guests of honor for the evening, representing the Alber Global Group, now the largest independent distributor of medical supplies in the country, I understood. This was it. I spent days planning every detail. The dress I would wear would be black, minimalist, elegant, hair up, soft makeup, but none of that mattered as much as what I would carry with me: the truth. In the form of documents, images, contracts, and a public statement with names, dates, and connections. On the night of the event, when I entered the hall, lit by crystal chandeliers and orchestral music playing in the background, I felt all eyes turned to me. Some were admiring, others were surprised, and some, like Dona Vera's, were pure panic. She saw me from afar and froze. Next to her, Juliana whispered something in the ear of one of the shareholders. Eduardo was there too. The man who once made me feel invisible now couldn't keep his eyes up. The ceremony began with formal speeches, polite applause, and crystal toasts. When they announced the award for honorary contribution to medical logistics for Eduardo Santoro, he walked to the stage with his usual confident air, until he saw me climbing the steps beside him, invited as co-author of the winning project. The master of ceremonies, confused, handed me the microphone. And then, with the calm of someone who had waited years for that moment, I began. Good evening. Before I say anything else, I would like to tell a brief story. A story about a young woman named Camila, who one day was humiliated for not having enough class to be among the greats. This young woman was rejected by a powerful family, who did not know where she came from, who ignored her origins, who judged her by what she wore, and not by what she carried in her blood. The room fell silent. This young woman was the daughter of Fernando Albuquerque and Livia Dourado, names that, as many of you know, were pillars in the development of the Brazilian logistics sector. Names that, to this day, are studied in universities as examples of innovation, ethics, and vision. People began to murmur. For years, this young woman lived anonymously. While her father's company was being dismantled, his will hidden, and her identity erased. But she came back. She came back with knowledge, with strategy, and with something that no inheritance can give: memory. My gaze met Eduardo's. He seemed smaller now, a man without a foundation. And that is how Camila Albuquerque became an indirect partner in the Santoro company, after taking control of 3 of its main suppliers and sealing mergers that rewrote the map of medical logistics in Brazil. And that is why I am here today, not as an extra, but as the protagonist. The room erupted in applause. Some were surprised, others were in awe, and others, I know, were in sheer fear, because there, in front of all the elite who had turned their backs on me, I had taken back what was mine. Eduardo tried to approach me after the ceremony. Camila, I had no idea. You didn't need to know, Eduardo. All you had to do was respect me. He stood still. The same silence that had hurt me so much years ago now surrounded him. Dona Vera left the hall before the end of the party. Juliana. Well, Juliana was approached by an investigative journalist as soon as she left. Someone had handed over documents linking her name to internal fraud and overpricing of supplies, evidence that I had kept hidden for too long. I didn't scream. I didn't take revenge with scandals. I took revenge with my presence, with success, with truth. And on that stage, under the spotlight that had never shone on me before, I understood. The best revenge is not humiliation. It is revelation. It is making them see what they have lost and can never regain. The weeks that followed that night were like watching the implosion of an empire that was believed to be indestructible. The Santoro family, for years, a benchmark of power and sophistication in the private healthcare sector, began to crumble, not with a big scandal, but with a series of small, precise blows of reality. And most of them were already underway long before the night of the gala. First came the removal of Juliana Santoro from the board of directors. An anonymous complaint to the public prosecutor's office, corroborated by documents handed over to the press, led to an investigation that revealed overpricing of contracts, triangulation of supplies, and illegal favoritism toward shell companies. And although she denied everything tooth and nail, the emails, transfers, and audio recordings were too clear. Donna Vera Santoro, once celebrated in social circles as a lady of philanthropy, saw her charity events wither away as sponsors fled. Those who once fawned over her now distanced themselves. The same social columns that extolled her eternal elegance began to report suspicions of family protection and corporate fraud. Eduardo, for his part, was still trying to save face. But the image of a director who lost control of strategic suppliers, allowed fraud within his own management, and ignored warnings led shareholders to demand his departure. He was invited to step down indefinitely, an informal dismissal with kid gloves, but one that everyone knew was the end. And me? I watched everything in silence and coldness. Not for pleasure, because, yes, for a moment I thought I would feel ecstasy. But no. What I felt was relief. Seeing those who humiliated me facing public shame, the whispers behind closed doors that only I used to hear, and the same expressions of contempt being directed at them, it was more just than sweet. But with the top comes the weight. My company grew in size and responsibility. I started giving interviews. I received invitations from universities, debate panels, international forums. I started investing in social projects, especially aimed at young women who, like me once, were discarded for not fitting in. My team grew, and with it, so did the care I took with my image. I knew the world likes to elevate those who come from humble beginnings, but it loves to hunt down flaws in those who dare to rise too quickly. Henrique, my lawyer and old friend, became the holding company's legal director. He was the one who once told me, "You won, Camila. But now, hold on to it." He was right. Revenge had been served. But my biggest challenge was to stay strong, without losing who I was before it all. Because behind the high heels, the powerful signature, and the contracts with figures that once seemed impossible, there was still the girl who was called classless for laughing too loudly at a dinner party. I made sure to keep the copy of the letter Juliana sent me from prison. She wrote in shaky handwriting, "You exposed us, and we deserved it. But please, don't destroy what little is left." I didn't reply. The destruction that happened there was not mine. It was theirs. I just pulled back the curtain. The rest was a consequence of what they were always willing to do to maintain power, even if it was at the expense of those they considered inferior. Perhaps the most ironic thing of all is that now my name, Camila Albuquerque, is synonymous with resilience, leadership, and elegance. Elegance, yes. The kind they never understood. The elegance of poise, dignity, and justice. And even after their downfall, I didn't want to see them crawl. I wanted them to learn, to feel, to remember. Because my victory was making them see themselves for the first time without their masks. Today, when I look in the mirror in the morning, I don't see a CEO, nor the woman who made headlines, nor the face of someone who beat the elite at their own game. I see a woman who carried deep wounds, who learned to turn humiliation into strategy, pain into purpose, and contempt into fuel. The girl who was called classless now occupies the leadership position of an international logistics empire. But the greatest achievement is not in the power I have accumulated. It is in the serenity I carry. Because in the end, it's not about revenge. Revenge is just the name we give to justice when it comes at our own hands. And that's what I did. I took back what was mine. My name, my story, my place. Sometimes people still ask me how I did it. How I had the cold blood, the patience, the precision. The answer is simple. I had no choice. Those who are rejected for simply existing must learn early on to protect themselves and to prepare. It took me years to understand that my simplicity was never a flaw, but a threat to those who live by appearances. The most beautiful thing about it all is that I never had to be like them to beat them. I never had to shout or use force. All I had to do was be who I am, with pride and memory, because identity, when fully embraced, becomes unshakable. I receive messages from women every day, women who have been discredited, belittled, silenced, and they say they feel seen through my story. That moves me, more than any award, more than any wealth. Yes, I got justice, but I also did something even greater. I broke the cycle of shame. I could have kept quiet. I could have accepted the place they imposed on me. But I chose to come back. I chose to rebuild myself without asking permission. And today, if I could talk to that Camilla who left the Santoro dinner humiliated, I would say, breathe, lift your chin. You will come back here, but not as a guest. As the hostess. The past shaped me, but it doesn't limit me. Pain forged me, but it doesn't define me. And the future is mine. Not for revenge, but because I deserve it. And to those who still judge by appearances, a warning. Those who are silent are not always defeated. Sometimes they are just setting the stage,